Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Dylan, 38, husband of 15 years, father to 2 incredible kids. Life wasn't perfect, but I thought we had something solid, until last Tuesday. That day started like any other. I got the kids ready for school, kissed Evelyn on my way out, and headed to work. At lunch, Evelyn called, saying we needed to talk when I got home. Her voice was calm, but something about it felt off. My stomach knotted all day. When I got home, she was already sitting at the dining table, papers spread out. My heart sank. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "I want a divorce," she said, her tone cold and detached, like she was telling me we were out of milk. I was stunned. "What? Why? Evelyn, what are you talking about?" Then she dropped the bomb. She'd been seeing someone else. Jeff. A co-worker. "It's been going on for a year," she admitted, not an ounce of remorse in her voice. My head spun. A year? How could I not have known? And Jeff, of all people, the guy she once called annoying during a work party. I asked why, begged her to explain. Her words cut deeper than any knife. "You've been so consumed with work and the kids, Dylan." I didn't feel alive anymore. But that wasn't the worst part. As if cheating wasn't enough, she handed me documents. She wanted the house and most of our savings, claiming she'd sacrificed so much for the family. She even tried to guilt me, saying, "If you really care about the kids, you'll make this easy." I didn't know what to say. I sat there numb, as she packed an overnight bag and left, saying she'd be staying with Jeff. My world collapsed in a matter of minutes. The hardest part was telling the kids. That night, my son, Jake, and daughter, Lily, saw me crying for the first time. I didn't have the words to explain everything, so I just told them mommy needed space. Now, I'm left here trying to piece together what's real. How did we go from family vacations and Sunday pancakes to this nightmare? And who the hell is Jeff? I don't know how to move forward, but one thing's clear: I'm not letting Evelyn take everything from me or my kids. The day after Evelyn dropped the bomb, I barely got out of bed. Every part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of sick joke, but her half-empty closet told me it was real. She even took the coffee maker, her favorite appliance. I guess Jeff didn't have one. I called out of work, something I've never done. I couldn't bring myself to face people, to act like everything was fine. Instead, I spent the day looking through photos of our family, birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. Every memory felt tainted now. Then, the texts started coming. Evelyn sent me a list of things she wanted to discuss. A lawyer's name was at the top of the list. I couldn't believe it. She'd been planning this for months, and I was too blind to see it. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Evelyn again, this time asking if I'd considered her proposal. Proposal? She wanted the house, most of the savings, and joint custody of the kids, though she mentioned wanting them most weekends, so she and Jeff could travel. That's when anger finally took over the sadness. I texted back, "Evelyn, you cheated on me. You don't get to dictate how this ends." Her response? "Let's not make this ugly, Dylan. Think of the kids." Think of the kids? The woman who just blew up their lives was lecturing me about them? I almost threw my phone across the room. A few hours later, Jake came into my room. He's only 11, but he's sharp. He asked, "Why did Mom leave? Is it my fault?" Hearing that broke me. I pulled him into a hug and told him, "No, buddy, this is not your fault. Mom and I just need to figure some things out." Lily, who's 7, hasn't said much. She just clings to me now, like she's afraid I'll leave too. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying moments from the last year: Evelyn being late from work, smiling at her phone, sudden shopping trips. How did I miss all the signs? And then there was Jeff. I started digging, searching his name online. Turns out, Jeff wasn't just a coworker, he was the head of some department I didn't fully understand. But what stood out was the lack of anything solid about him. No Facebook, no Instagram, just a LinkedIn profile with a vague job history. It didn't sit right with me. The next day, I met with a lawyer. I don't know much about divorce, but I knew I wasn't going to let Evelyn walk all over me. The lawyer was calm and to the point. "The courts will consider the best interests of the children. You have a strong case, especially given her infidelity. Hearing that gave me a shred of hope. I couldn't change what Evelyn did, but I could fight for Jake and Lily. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch, staring at an old photo of Evelyn and me on our honeymoon. I felt like I didn't even know the woman in that picture anymore. But one thing was clear, I wasn't just going to roll over and let her take everything. Not for her. Not for Jeff. And definitely not for my kids. A week after Evelyn dropped her bombshell, life felt like a blur. I was running on autopilot, getting the kids to school, handling work, and collapsing into bed each night, too exhausted to think. But underneath it all, anger kept bubbling up, especially every time Evelyn texted me. Her messages always had this manipulative tone, like she was trying to be civil, but really, she was just pushing her agenda. She even had the nerve to suggest, maybe the kids would adjust better if they stayed with me full time. You can have visitation whenever you want. Visitation? Like I was some deadbeat dad? I told her flat out, you don't get to play the perfect mom now. I've been the one who's always here for them. Evelyn didn't reply, which honestly felt like a small victory. But things took a turn when my buddy Matt came over. He's been my best friend since college, and when I told him what was going on, he didn't sugarcoat it. Dylan, she's lying to you. You don't just leave a 15-year marriage for some guy unless there's more to it. Jeff's gotta be shady. I told him about my gut feeling, that something wasn't right with Jeff, and Matt offered to help dig deeper. He's good with tech, so I handed him what little I knew about Jeff and let him work his magic. Meanwhile, Evelyn started introducing Jeff to the kids. Jake mentioned it casually one night, saying, Mom's friend Jeff took us to get ice cream. It felt like a punch to the gut. Did you like him? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake shrugged. He's okay, I guess. But he's not funny like you. That made me smile for a second, but then Jake added, Mom says Jeff's going to be around a lot now. I clenched my fists under the table, but I didn't let it show. I didn't want to put the kids in the middle of this mess. That night, Matt called me. Dude, you were right about Jeff. I don't have all the details yet, but there's something off about his work history. He's bounced around a lot, and one of the companies he worked for is under investigation for fraud. Fraud. That word stuck in my head like a bad song. I asked Matt to keep digging, and he promised he would. The next day, Evelyn showed up at the house unannounced. She waltzed in like she still lived there, saying she needed to grab a few things. I let her, mostly for the kids' sake, but I couldn't resist asking, so, how's Jeff? Her face twitched, just for a second, but she recovered quickly. He's great, Dylan. He's everything I've been missing. I almost laughed. Missing? Evelyn, you've been missing honesty and loyalty for a long time. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she said something that sent my blood boiling. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. I didn't respond. I just let her grab her things and leave. But in that moment, I realized something. Evelyn wasn't just selfish, she was cruel. Later that night, Matt called again. Dylan, I've got more on Jeff. You're not going to believe this. And just like that, I knew I was on the verge of uncovering something big. Something that might finally turn the tables. Matt didn't waste time getting to the point. Jeff's not just shady, he's a full-on scam artist, he said, his voice low and serious. I sat up straight. What do you mean? Well, for starters, he's been tied to a string of failed businesses. Some of them are under investigation for money laundering and embezzlement. And that company he left last year? It didn't just shut down. They fired him when they discovered missing funds. My chest tightened. Does Evelyn know about this? Matt paused. I doubt it. If she does, she's either in on it or too blinded by whatever fantasy he's selling her. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. This wasn't just about Evelyn's betrayal anymore. It was about protecting my kids. There was no way I was letting a guy like Jeff anywhere near them. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him everything Matt had found. He listened carefully, then said, if we can confirm this and tie it to his current situation, it could strengthen your custody case. That gave me a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, Evelyn was acting more confident than ever. She sent me an email outlining her ideal custody arrangement. Full custody for her, with me getting alternate weekends. She also wanted child support and a small percentage of my retirement fund, claiming it was fair since she'd supported me emotionally during my career. I couldn't believe her nerve. Emotionally supported me? I muttered, shaking my head. More like emotionally sabotaged me. But instead of responding to her demands, I focused on gathering evidence. Matt and I started looking deeper into Jeff's recent activities, and what we found was worse than I expected. Turns out, Jeff had a pattern. He'd get close to women with stable finances, convince them to invest in his business ventures, then leave them high and dry when everything fell apart. Some of these women had even filed lawsuits against him, but none had stuck. He was slippery, always covering his tracks just enough to avoid jail time. Armed with this information, I confronted Evelyn. I didn't want to yell or argue, I just wanted answers. I called her and asked to meet at a neutral place, a cafe downtown. She agreed, probably thinking I wanted to discuss the divorce. When she arrived, I wasted no time. "Do you even know who Jeff is?" I asked, sliding a folder of documents across the table. She frowned and opened it. Inside were copies of everything Matt and I had found: lawsuits, failed business records, even an article about one of his victims. Her face turned pale as she flipped through the pages. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's who Jeff really is," I said. "He's not some perfect guy who makes you feel alive, Evelyn. He's a con artist." Her eyes darted around the cafe, probably checking to see if anyone was listening. "This doesn't prove anything," she said defensively, but her voice wavered. "It proves enough," I shot back. "You think he cares about you? About our kids? You're just his next target." Evelyn pushed the folder back toward me. "I don't believe you," she said, but the look in her eyes told a different story. She was shaken. I stood up. "Believe whatever you want, but when this all comes crashing down, don't say I didn't warn you. And don't think for a second that I'll let you drag the kids into his mess." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. Evelyn could play her games, but now I had leverage. The next step was clear: expose Jeff, protect my kids, and make sure Evelyn faced the consequences of her choices. The confrontation at the cafe stuck with me for days. Evelyn didn't reach out afterward, and I took that as a good sign. Maybe she was second-guessing Jeff. Or maybe she was too stubborn to admit she'd been duped. Either way, the silence was better than her usual manipulative texts. But it didn't last. One evening, just as I was helping Lily with her homework, Evelyn called. I debated ignoring it, but I didn't want her accusing me of being difficult. I stepped into the hallway and picked up. Her voice was tight, almost rehearsed. "Dylan, I looked into some of what you showed me." Jeff explained everything. "Those documents are just misunderstandings. People were out to get him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Evelyn, do you even hear yourself? How many misunderstandings does one person have before you realize they're the problem?" She sighed, that exasperated tone she always used when she thought she was smarter than me. "You're just trying to scare me because you can't handle that I've moved on." That hit a nerve. "No, Evelyn, I'm trying to protect our kids from getting caught up in your mess. But if you want to keep living in denial, go ahead. Just don't expect me to clean up after you." She hung up without another word. After the call, I felt more determined than ever to expose Jeff. If Evelyn wasn't going to see reason, I'd have to make it impossible for her to ignore. The next day, Matt came through again. He found out that one of Jeff's former partners was willing to talk. Her name was Christine, and she had a lot to say. We set up a video call, and the moment Christine came on screen, her expression said it all. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been through hell and back. She wasted no time getting into it. "Jeff's a predator," she said bluntly. "He makes you feel like you're the center of his world, and before you know it, you're giving him everything: your time, your money, your trust. Then he's gone." Christine told us how Jeff had convinced her to invest in a tech startup that never existed. He drained her savings, maxed out her credit cards, and disappeared the moment she confronted him. She even filed a police report, but Jeff was always one step ahead, using fake names and offshore accounts to cover his tracks. "Does he ever get violent?" I asked, my stomach twisting at the thought of my kids being around him. Christine shook her head. "Not physically. He's too smart for that. But he'll gaslight you until you're questioning your own sanity." By the end of the call, I had everything I needed to confirm what I already knew: Jeff was dangerous. That night, I stayed up drafting an email to Evelyn, attaching the recording of Christine's testimony, with her permission, and every document Matt had uncovered. I kept it short and to the point. If you care about our kids at all, you'll read this and rethink your decisions. This isn't about us anymore. It's about them. I hit send and waited. The next morning, Evelyn responded. It wasn't the apology or admission I'd hoped for, but it was something. We'll talk tomorrow. For the first time in weeks, I felt like there was a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, Evelyn was starting to realize the damage she was doing. The next day, Evelyn showed up at the house right after the kids left for school. She looked tired, her usual perfectly polished appearance noticeably off. For a second, I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly replaced by anger. I've read the emails, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. And I saw the video. I gestured toward the couch, keeping my tone neutral. And she sat down, fiddling with the strap of her purse. Jeff explained some of it. He says Christine is lying, trying to ruin his reputation because she's bitter about their breakup. I let out a dry laugh. Bitter? Evelyn, she's broke because of him. Her story matches everything Matt and I found. Are you really going to believe him over actual evidence? Her eyes darted to the floor. He's not perfect, Dylan. But he's not the monster you're making him out to be. I leaned forward, trying to keep my frustration in check. Evelyn, this isn't just about you. What happens when he scams you too? What happens when it's our kids who get hurt? For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw doubt flicker across her face, but she quickly replaced it with that same stubborn determination. Jeff isn't like that with me. He loves me. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I took a deep breath, then said, if you're so sure, then tell him to show proof. Bank statements, business records, anything that clears his name. She hesitated, which told me everything I needed to know. Jeff didn't have proof because he couldn't prove what didn't exist. She trailed off, her voice cracking slightly. I don't know what to believe anymore. I softened my tone. Believe the facts, Evelyn. Look at what's in front of you, not what Jeff's telling you. He's using you, and the longer you ignore it, the worse it's going to get. She stood abruptly, clutching her purse like a lifeline. I need time to think, she muttered, heading for the door. I didn't stop her. Take all the time you want, but remember, our kids come first. Always. After she left, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. She was starting to crack, but Jeff's hold on her was stronger than I'd realized. That night, I got a call from Matt. I've got more, he said, sounding almost excited. What is it? Jeff's got a pending lawsuit in another state. Fraud charges. It hasn't gone to court yet, but if he's found guilty, he's looking at serious jail time. That was the leverage I needed. If Evelyn wouldn't see reason, maybe the threat of public scandal would snap her out of it. The next step was clear: confront Jeff himself. It was risky, but I couldn't let this drag on. Not for Evelyn, and certainly not for my kids. I wasn't sure how it would play out, but one thing was certain: Jeff wasn't getting away with this. A few days later, I got my chance to confront Jeff. Evelyn texted, saying she was taking the kids out for lunch and Jeff would be joining them. My stomach churned at the thought of him playing dad, but I kept my response calm. That's fine. Drop them back by 5. Instead of stewing at home, I decided to take control. I asked Matt to meet me at the restaurant, where I planned to have a little chat with Jeff. When I walked in, I spotted them immediately. Evelyn was at the table with Jake and Lily, her smile forced. And there was Jeff, mid-40s, slicked back hair, wearing a blazer that screamed, "I'm trying too hard." He was laughing loudly, trying to impress the kids. It made my blood boil. Matt and I sat at a nearby table, just close enough to keep an eye on them without being obvious. After about 20 minutes, Evelyn got up, probably to use the restroom. This was my moment. I walked over, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "Jeff," I said, keeping my voice steady. He looked up, surprised but quickly recovering with a smarmy grin. "Dylan, right? Evelyn's told me about you." I ignored his attempt at small talk and leaned in slightly. "We need to talk. Privately." Jeff glanced at the kids, then at me, clearly debating whether to make a scene. "Sure," he said finally, standing up. "Let's step outside." Once we were outside, I didn't waste time. "I know who you are," I said, keeping my tone even. "I know about Christine, the lawsuits, the scams. I know everything." Jeff raised an eyebrow, trying to play it cool. I have no idea what you're talking about. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You've made a career out of lying and stealing, and now you're trying to worm your way into my family. But here's the thing, you messed with the wrong guy. His smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. Evelyn and I are happy, Dylan. Maybe you should focus on moving on instead of digging into things that don't concern you. That did it. I couldn't keep my anger contained anymore. It does concern me when my kids are involved. If you think I'm going to sit back and let you drag them into your mess, you're delusional. Jeff's eyes narrowed. Careful, Dylan. Accusations like that can get you into trouble. I laughed bitterly. Trouble? That's rich, coming from you. How's that fraud case in Colorado going? Oh right, it's still pending. His face went pale. For the first time, he looked genuinely rattled. Here's the deal, I said, my voice cold. You walk away. From Evelyn, from my kids, from this entire situation. If you don't, I'll make sure every skeleton in your closet sees the light of day. Jeff tried to regain his composure, but the cracks were showing. You think you can scare me? I don't need to scare you, I said, stepping back. I just need to expose you. And trust me, I will. Without another word, I turned and walked back inside. Evelyn had returned to the table, looking confused as I approached. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice tense. Just checking in, I said casually, glancing at Jake and Lily. I'll see you two later, okay? They nodded, and I walked out, my heart still racing. That night, Evelyn texted me. What did you say to Jeff? He's acting weird. I didn't respond. Let her figure it out. The ball was in Jeff's court now, but I wasn't done. If he thought this was over, he was in for a rude awakening. The morning after my confrontation with Jeff, Evelyn showed up at the house unannounced again. She looked tense, her usual calm exterior cracking. What did you say to him? She demanded as soon as I opened the door. Come in, I said, keeping my tone neutral. No need to drag this out on the porch. She stepped inside, arms crossed. Jeff told me you threatened him. Is that true? I didn't flinch. I didn't threaten him. I told him the truth, that I know who he is and what he's done. Evelyn, how can you keep defending this guy? He's not who you think he is. She hesitated, then shook her head. You don't get it, Dylan. Jeff's not perfect, but he's not some criminal mastermind, either. He's been through a lot. People take things out of context. I sighed, frustrated but trying to stay calm. Evelyn, you've seen the evidence. How much more do you need before you start protecting yourself, and our kids? She looked away, her resolve clearly faltering. He told me you're just trying to scare me because you can't handle that I've moved on. There it was again, her default excuse to dismiss anything I said. I took a deep breath and leaned against the counter. Evelyn, I don't care about your relationship with him. This isn't about me being bitter or jealous. It's about the kids. Do you really want them around a man who's being investigated for fraud? Her silence spoke volumes. Finally, she said, I need time to figure things out. I stepped closer, my voice soft but firm. Take all the time you need, but remember this, if you let Jeff drag you down, you'll lose everything. And I'll make sure the kids are safe, no matter what. She left without another word, but the look in her eyes told me she was finally starting to question things. Later that week, Matt called me again. You're not going to believe this, he said, barely containing his excitement. One of Jeff's former business partners reached out to me. She saw the stuff we posted online about him. What did she say? I asked, my heart pounding. She confirmed everything we already know, and more. Jeff has been using fake identities to dodge lawsuits. She even sent me copies of emails where he bragged about scamming investors. It was a gold mine. With this new evidence, I went straight to my lawyer. He reviewed everything carefully, nodding as he went. This is good, Dylan. This strengthens your custody case significantly. If Evelyn doesn't cut ties with him, she could lose primary custody altogether. Hearing that gave me a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about exposing Jeff anymore, it was about ensuring my kids had a stable, safe future. A few days later, Evelyn called me. Her voice was shaky, a far cry from her usual confidence. Dylan, I don't know what to do, she said, her words rushing out in a panicked mess. Jeff's been acting strange ever since you talked to him. He's distant, secretive. And now Now there's money missing from my account. I clenched my jaw. I warned you, Evelyn. He's using you. I don't know if I can believe that, she whispered, like she was trying to convince herself. Then check your bank statements, I snapped. How much proof do you need? There was a long pause. Finally, she said, I think I made a mistake. It wasn't the full admission I wanted, but it was a start. Now that Evelyn's trust in Jeff was starting to crumble, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. The question was, how far would Jeff go to protect his secrets? The days after Evelyn's panicked call were tense. She didn't reach out again, but I knew the cracks were widening. Jeff had likely sensed her doubt, and from what I knew about men like him, he wouldn't go quietly. My focus shifted to protecting the kids. They'd been through enough already, and if Evelyn couldn't see the danger, I'd make sure the courts did. One evening, as I was helping Jake with his science project, Evelyn showed up at the door, unannounced again. This time she looked disheveled, hair messy, eyes red, like she hadn't slept in days. I sent Jake to his room and let her in, bracing for whatever storm she'd bring. It's over, she said, sinking onto the couch. Her voice was flat, empty. Jeff's gone. He cleared out his stuff, took some of my jewelry, and drained what was left in my savings account. I wanted to say, I told you so, but the words wouldn't come. Looking at her now, she didn't seem like the cold, calculated woman who'd shattered our family a month ago. She looked broken, like someone who'd been played for a fool. Did you call the police? I asked. She nodded weakly. They're investigating, but they don't think they'll find him. He's good at disappearing. That part didn't surprise me. I sat down across from her, keeping my tone neutral. Evelyn, I don't know what to say. I warned you. She flinched, like the words stung more than they should have. I know you did, she whispered. And I didn't listen. I thought he loved me. I thought her voice cracked, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened up, forcing herself to look at me. I need your help, Dylan. The kids. They shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes. That caught me off guard. Evelyn admitting fault was something I never thought I'd see. What are you saying? I think they should stay with you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. At least for now. I need to get my life together before I can be the mom they deserve. It was the first time in weeks that I felt something close to relief. She was finally putting the kids first, even if it had taken a disaster to get there. You're doing the right thing, I said, keeping my tone steady. But Evelyn, this doesn't mean everything's fixed. You need to take responsibility, for the kids, for yourself. She nodded, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I know. I don't know where to start. After she left, I sat in silence, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in weeks, it felt like I could breathe again. The storm wasn't over, but at least now, I had a chance to rebuild. For Jake and Lily, for myself, and maybe even for Evelyn, if she ever found a way to fix the mess she'd made. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Jake asked, "Is Mom okay?" I hesitated, not wanting to lie. "She's going through a tough time," I said. "But she loves you, and she's trying to make things better." Jake seemed to accept that, but Lily just hugged me tighter. "I like it here with you, Daddy," she said softly. I kissed her forehead. "I like it here with you too, sweetheart." As I turned off the lights, I realized something. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were going to be okay. Evelyn didn't stay out of our lives completely, but her presence became sporadic. She visited the kids once or twice a week, staying for short bursts, always looking like she was carrying the weight of the world. I wasn't cruel, but I kept things distant. My priority was the kids, not cleaning up her emotional wreckage. One Saturday, as Jake and I were tossing a football in the yard, Evelyn called. She sounded hesitant. "I need to talk to you," she said. "In person. It's important." I agreed to meet her at a cafe downtown, the same one where I'd confronted her before. When I arrived, she was already there, clutching a cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her hands were shaking. "I found something," she said, sliding a small envelope across the table. Her voice was strained, barely holding together. It was hidden in one of Jeff's bags. He must have forgotten to take it when he left. I opened the envelope, finding a stack of documents inside. They were financial records, accounts in fake names, transaction histories leading to offshore banks, and a list of people who'd clearly been victims of Jeff scams. My stomach churned as I flipped through them. This wasn't just a smoking gun, it was an entire arsenal. Why didn't you take this to the police? I asked, looking up at her. She bit her lip. I didn't want to go alone. And I didn't know if they'd believe me. For the first time in a long time, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd married, the one who used to stand strong no matter what. They'll believe you, I said firmly. This is evidence. It's everything we need to bring him down. Evelyn nodded, her eyes glassy. I'm scared, Dylan. What if he comes back? What if he tries to hurt me, or the kids? That struck a nerve. The thought of Jeff anywhere near my family made my blood boil. He's not coming back, I said. And if he does, he'll have to get through me first. We took the documents to the police that afternoon. The officer who met with us was serious but professional. He scanned the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. This is good, he said. Very good. We've been tracking Jeff for years, but this might be the break we need. Evelyn and I left the station in silence, the weight of the situation hanging between us. As we reached the parking lot, she turned to me. Thank you, she said softly, for helping me, even after everything. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her it wasn't for her, it was for the kids, for their safety, for my peace of mind. But another part of me felt sorry for her. She'd been manipulated, used, and discarded, and now she was trying to pick up the pieces. You did the right thing, I said finally. That's what matters. She gave a weak smile before walking to her car. I watched her drive away, wondering if this was the start of her redemption, or just another chapter in the chaos. Back home, I updated Matt on everything. He was thrilled that the police finally had enough to act. You did it, man, he said. Jeff's going down. But I didn't feel like celebrating. I still had a long way to go, custody arrangements, rebuilding my life, and most importantly, giving Jake and Lily the stability they deserved. Still, for the first time in weeks, it felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. That night, as I sat on the couch flipping through channels, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evelyn. Thank you again, Dylan. For everything. I hope one day you can forgive me. I stared at the message for a long time before putting the phone down. I wasn't sure if forgiveness was in the cards, but at least now, we were finally moving forward. The following week brought a sense of normalcy I hadn't felt in a long time. Jake and Lily settled into a routine at home, and for the first time in weeks, they seemed happy. Jake even started cracking jokes at dinner again, and Lily was glued to my side like she was making up for lost time. But the storm wasn't entirely over. The police reached out to let me know they'd issued a warrant for Jeff's arrest. His crimes spanned multiple states, and the documents Evelyn had turned in were instrumental in tying him to ongoing investigations. Still, Jeff had gone completely off the radar, which made it hard to relax. Evelyn, for her part, kept a low profile. She started seeing a therapist and picking up part-time work to stay afloat financially. When she visited the kids, she seemed quieter, humbled. I couldn't tell if it was genuine regret or just exhaustion, but at least she wasn't pushing for custody anymore. One afternoon, while I was at work, Matt called. Big news, he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. They got him. I sat up in my chair. Jeff. Yeah. Caught him trying to board a flight under a fake name. He's in custody now, and the DA's already building a case. Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my chest. Jeff was finally out of the picture, and for the first time, it felt like we could truly start moving on. That night, I told Jake and Lily. I kept it simple, saying the man who had been around their mom wasn't a good person, but the police had made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Jake nodded solemnly, his young mind processing it all. Good, he said. He was weird anyway. Lily didn't say much, just hugged me tight and whispered, I love you, Daddy. With Jeff gone, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. My lawyer was confident the custody case would now be a formality, given Evelyn's willingness to cooperate. At work, I threw myself into new projects, rediscovering a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Then there was Lauren. We'd met a few months ago at a local community event, long before my world fell apart. At the time, I thought nothing of it, just a friendly chat with a kind, smart woman. But after everything happened, I kept thinking about her. She had this calming presence, the kind of energy that made you feel like everything might be okay. I hadn't reached out, partly because it felt too soon, partly because I wasn't sure I was ready. But one evening, as I sat alone after the kids were asleep, I found myself pulling up her number. The conversation was easy, natural, like we'd been friends for years. I told her a bit about what I'd been through, not all the details, but enough for her to understand. She listened without judgment, offering kind words that felt like a balm on an open wound. We agreed to meet for coffee the following weekend, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself looking forward to something. As the days passed, I realized something important. Jeff, Evelyn, all of it, they didn't define me. My life wasn't about what I'd lost anymore, it was about what I could build. For myself, for my kids, and maybe even for someone like Lauren. By the time I met her for coffee, I felt like a different person, stronger, more grounded. And when she smiled at me across the table, I couldn't help but think, maybe this is what moving on looks like. The coffee date with Lauren was everything I didn't know I needed. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, her work as a teacher, my adventures raising Jake and Lily, and even our shared love for terrible action movies. For the first time in months, I laughed. Really laughed. At the end of the evening, as we stood by her car, she gave me a warm, understanding smile. "You've been through a lot," she said softly. "But I think you're stronger than you realize." Her words stuck with me. I didn't feel strong, not yet, but for the first time, I believed it might be possible. Over the next few weeks, Lauren and I started seeing each other more. It wasn't anything serious. We both agreed to take things slow, but it was nice to have someone to talk to who didn't see me as the guy whose life fell apart. She treated me like me. Meanwhile, things with Evelyn continued to shift. She stuck to her decision to let the kids stay with me full-time, only taking them out for occasional afternoons. She was still distant, but there was a quiet determination about her now. I got the sense that she was genuinely trying to rebuild her life, even if the pieces didn't fit the way she'd hoped. One afternoon, she showed up at the house looking nervous. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, standing awkwardly on the porch. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. She sat down at the kitchen table, fidgeting with her hands. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "For everything. For Jeff, for how I handled things. For what I did to you and the kids." I leaned against the counter, unsure how to respond. "It's not just me you hurt, Evelyn. It's them too." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "And I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm trying to make things right. I wanted you to know that." There was sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. "It's going to take time," I said honestly. "For me, for the kids. But if you're serious about being better, then that's what matters." She nodded, tears welling up but not falling. "Thank you, Dylan. For not giving up on them. On me." After she left, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, even a flicker of hope. Not for us, but for the possibility that we could learn to co-parent peacefully. As weeks turned into months, life began to stabilize. The custody arrangement was finalized, giving me primary custody with Evelyn having weekends and holidays. Jake and Lily were thriving in school, their laughter filling the house again. And Lauren? She became a steady presence in our lives. She wasn't trying to replace anyone, she made that clear from the start, but she brought a warmth and balance that I hadn't realized we were missing. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Lily climbed into Lauren's lap, curling up like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jake glanced over and grinned. "She likes you," he said. Lauren smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "I like her too. It wasn't perfect, life never is, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough." Months passed, and life finally began to feel normal again. Not the same as before, but a new kind of normal. Jake was thriving on his soccer team, Lily had joined a dance class, and the house was starting to feel alive with laughter and warmth again. Evelyn stuck to her visitation schedule and made an effort to stay involved in the kids' lives. She'd even started taking parenting workshops and therapy sessions seriously, which, to her credit, seemed to make a difference. She was less defensive, more attentive, and though the trust between us was gone, we'd reached a tentative truce for the kids' sake. Jeff, on the other hand, was out of the picture for good. The DA's case against him was rock solid, thanks in part to Evelyn's evidence. He ended up pleading guilty to multiple charges, and the last I heard, he was sentenced to several years in prison. Knowing he couldn't hurt anyone else brought a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Through all of this, Lauren became a constant source of support. She had this way of making even the hardest days feel manageable. One Saturday, she joined us for a day at the park, where Jake challenged her to a soccer match. She played terribly on purpose, letting him score goal after goal, and his laughter echoed across the field. Later, as we sat under a tree watching Lily chase butterflies, Lauren turned to me. "You're doing an amazing job with them, you know." I smiled, her words warming something inside me. "I couldn't do it without you." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought about saying more, about asking if she saw a future for us beyond the slow, careful pace we'd settled into. But something held me back. I wasn't sure if I was ready, or if she was. That answer came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at me with her big, curious eyes. "Daddy, is Lauren your girlfriend?" The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged, playing with the edge of her blanket. "Because I like her. And she makes you smile a lot." I chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, she does. And I like her too." Lily beamed, her small arms wrapping around my neck. "You should marry her," she whispered conspiratorially. I laughed, kissing her forehead. "One step at a time, sweetheart." Later that night, as I sat on the couch, I thought about what Lily had said. Lauren had become an important part of our lives, not just for me, but for the kids too. Maybe it was time to stop holding back. The next weekend, while the kids were with Evelyn, I took Lauren out to dinner at a cozy little Italian restaurant. Over candlelight and wine, I finally let the words spill out. "I don't know where this is going," I admitted, "but I know I want it to keep going. You've been everything to me, Lauren. To us. And I just want you to know how much you mean to me." Her eyes sparkled, and she reached across the table to take my hand. "I feel the same way," she said softly. It wasn't a grand declaration or a dramatic moment. It was quiet, simple, and perfect. As we walked back to the car, her hand in mine, I realized that for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward, step by step, toward something good. Something real. And this time, I wasn't afraid.